Hello and welcome to the weekly newscast by First Ukraine. The last news for this week are already prepared for our viewers. My name is Victoria Zabiyan. Thank you for joining us. This week was marked by set anniversary of battles of Volhyvirsk and Debaltsevo settlement. It was one of the most cruel attacks of Russian army on Ukrainian land. Let's watch how it was.
1 year ago, battles for Volhyvirsk settlement had begun. They were the beginning of wide-scale Russian attack on railway junction Debaltsevo. On that moment, Ukrainian soldiers kept the strategic base on terrorist communication. During the autumn 2014, separatists unsuccessfully attacked and had great losses. But in January 2015, they got a support Russian soldiers and tanks. With new forces, they began to attack. 59-year-old soldier Igor Svinchuk was born in Donetsk. He took part in battles in the staff of battalion Kievan Ras for Debaltsevo. There is only one parallel. Withdrawing of our soldiers and lie that separatists are withdrawing their forces too. Our guys are killed then in Debaltsevo and today. When all tanks were withdrawn, we had only one armored personnel carrier. One of units was surrounded and Russian tank didn't give them the possibility to went out. Armored personnel carrier has no chances against tank, but it has quick firing gun. I used it against the tank and it couldn't shoot anymore. Desperate battle led to save the unit, but Igor Svinchuk violated the order about withdrawing of forces. Later they brought me a medal from other brigade for saving the guys and said that I should be given under the tribunal for order violation. But anyway, they gave me a medal. It is always with me. Under the pressure of Russian troops, the Debaltsevo base was lost and Ukraine was forced to sit at the negotiation table with terrorists. According to the Minsk agreements, Ukrainian soldiers had withdrawn heavy armament from the dividing line, but partially everyday struggles happen. Also, the agreement forces that Ukraine will renew the control on its border, but it still doesn't happen. With support of Russia, terrorists demand complete amnesty and special status for not recognized republics. In other words, they want to get social payments from Kiev, but in fact to stay independent. I suggest to break up in civilized way, free the territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and we will make some economic agreements. Soldier who defended the Debaltsevo base has his own variant for terrorists. The only one special status for those who killed our soldiers is possible – the cross at the cemetery. For this I fight. If the heavy armament had been withdrawn, I would go to foot troops.
Europe's migration, refugee crisis and international terrorism took center stage at the winter session of Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Moreover, Ukrainian question was also discussed in Strasbourg. More details about it watching the following story.
I would like to declare Mr. Agrement elected President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and I would like to invite him to come up and take the chair. My congratulations and our best wishes for his subsequent work.
Winter session of Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe opened with voting for a new head. Spanish MP Pedro Agramunt became the president. He was nominated by European People's Party and was the only candidate. Agramunt is known for his strong position for Ukrainians' territorial integrity. During the inaugural speech, he promised he would help Ukraine to renew the sovereignty over its territory. President appealed to Kremlin with the request to release Nadia Savchenko, the Assembly's parliamentarian and pilot. She is under custody in Russia.
We have conflicts which are still unresolved in Europe. The situation in Ukraine remains very delicate. The conflict has already taken over 9,000 lives. Russian-backed separatists still control part of the country, and peace remains elusive.
Assembly Bureau decided that Russian delegation won't take part in the plenary session. Despite of that, Russia has to pay full fee. It's approximately 8% of common budget of Council of Europe, said Anne Brasser, the ex-president of Parliament Assembly of the Council of Europe. Also, she announced when delegation would have the right to participate in Assembly activities.
They will not be able to form their delegation this year otherwise than after a new election.
At the same time, head of permanent Ukrainian delegation Volodymyr Ariev was elected as the committee president of Culture, Education, Science and Media. He thanked the Assembly for trust in his Twitter. Although the report about the functioning of democratic institutions in Ukraine was postponed until next year, it is to be recalled that the last report was issued in 2012. Nevertheless, the country reports should be presented every 2 years. Co-rapporteur for Ukraine, Georgi Shukla, said that Parliament Assembly of the Council of Europe had decided not to speed up the presentation of monitoring results on Ukraine. About this informs Ukrainian online media Europejska Pravda.
It will not be ready in spring or summer. Then we will decide. I think it is definitely not the best time to consider the report on Ukraine during the period of transformations, at the time when constitutional reform is passed through Ukrainian parliament.
According to Shukla, the most optimistic scenario is that the report on Ukraine to be presented not earlier than at the end of the year.
So, Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe went to occupied Crimea. It should evaluate the situation with human rights on the occupied peninsula. This visit was confirmed by Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. Secretary General of Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe said that 2.5 million people who live in Crimea are under the protection of European Convention for Human Rights and they must have possibility to use it. But during the last year, non-delegation of international organizations could reach there. As well, Ukrainian filmmaker Oleg Sentsov from Crimea is staying in Russian colony all this time. A lot of colleagues and activists all the time are organizing different actions and support him. New project is presentation of new book written by Sentsov before the arrest. More details in our following story.
Publishing house Folio present new project, a book of Ukrainian filmmaker Oleg Sentsov with optimistic name By the Book, It Is Funny. As it is known, during last year, Oleg Sentsov, who is staying in prison, had become a victim of Russian propaganda. On the presentation in Kiev, moderators also discussed ways of further support of the condemnation of all illegally imprisoned Ukrainian citizens in Russia.
This book was written before all events related with his arrest and trial. The publication of this book is not an event of supporting a person who is in such difficult conditions. Important that it is new offer in Ukrainian book market. We are understanding that Ukrainian cultural environment doesn't help in Russia, but it can help in such way that will always remind to Russian cultural environment on the principle face-to-face, to their friends, and all the time necessary to raise this issue until Sentsov will return to Ukraine.
Oleg Sentsov, who was unjustly sentenced to 20 years imprisonment throughout the process, is not afraid to say the truth about illegal occupation of the Crimea and about false justice of Russian Federation. He said he would never believe in stories made by Russian propaganda.
Part of invader country cannot be fair.
Instead, Russian federal channels have spared no loud vocabulary about filmmaker. They are calling him a saboteur, terrorist, and active member of the right sector.
We recall that Sentsov is a member of right sector. He was detained in Simferopol at the 11th of May. Other members of his group, altogether 4 people, were under the arrest. They admitted that they passed diversionary preparation and tried to organize terror chief on the peninsula.
Despite of the appeal signed by world-famous filmmakers to Russian President Putin and draw attention to this case at various film events, Oleg Sentsov is still in Russian prison.
Yes, I've signed a letter of support for Oleg because the whole case looks very suspicious. It is not clear.
Before his arrest, Sentsov began a new film The Rhino, which was suspended. Ukrainian state film agency said that they will continue financing of this film and wait for the return of filmmaker.
Political establishment of Ukraine continues discussion on constitution changes. However, it stays difficult for political forces to find a consensus. More details about decision-making process concerning constitution changes, watch in our following story.
Constitution reform stays one of the most urgent questions for Ukrainian politicians and society. It was expected that in this nearest future, Parliament votes for changes and points about decentralization and justice. But disagreement of President and government about procedure of these changes led to the split within coalition. Petro Poroshenko wants to change Constitution through the Parliament voting and to provide changes as soon as possible.
Так сталося, що зміни до Конституції в частині децентралізації є.
It happens that constitution changes in part of decentralization is one of the key elements for Ukraine's peace plan, Minsk agreements. All 13 points of Minsk agreement are about how to provide peace on the east of Ukraine. One more key element of my presidential program, peace on the east. In his turn, Prime Minister of Ukraine Arseniy Yatsenyuk said that the only one appropriate way to change constitution is all-Ukrainian referendum. Nobody except Ukrainian people has no right to define what the main law should be. Referendum concerning constitution changes is a straight government by people in free and democratic state. Experts assure that results of referendum could be unexpected. Moreover, the mechanism of such procedure are absent at the moment, taking into account that part of the state is occupied by Russia and pro-Russian terrorists. Constitution changes also was the reason of disunity of coalition. Leader of Batkivshina party Yulia Tymoshenko refused from his turn to rule the coalition, arguing that decisions concerning constitution changes are made without participation of parliament, but only by several people close to president and government. Can you imagine that for all time of this coalition existing, meeting of coalition was called never? It means that coalition is not a subject of decision-making. I ask you right now, I address to head of Ukrainian parliament, to leaders of all factions, call for coalition meeting where MP will not be the puppets and the piano players, but subjects of decision-making process. The Speaker of Parliament, Volodymyr Hrosman, reminded Yulia Tymoshenko that taking into account that it is her turn to rule the coalition, she has a right to gather the meeting. As a result, leader of Samopomich faction took the responsibility and called coalition council to discuss further work. Our suggestion is a full reset of government, and for this the will of coalition is needed. That is why today the decision was made to recall to government that it has to make a formal report, which was forgot by government, and this kind of action is disrespect to people. And the second thing is that we are renewing the consultation of Coalition Council according to regime that was described in coalition agreement. Nevertheless, constitution changes concerning justice were not so controversial as the decentralization topic. So, President of Ukraine has already brought a bill about constitution changes in article about justice to Parliament. According to it, Parliament can pass a non-confidence motion against Prosecutor General and to force him to resign.
Today our guest in the studio, Rostislav Pavlenko, Deputy Head of President Poroshenko's administration. Nice to meet you here in our studio.
Good evening.
And my first question is that decentralization topic stays the most hot topic and controversial point for all political forces right now. And it is interesting what the point of discussion, the essence of reform or the procedure.
The question is that the decentralization as such is not a point of discussion because more than 70% of Ukrainian population supports the ideas of decentralization, of having more power closer to them, and actually all the main political forces had those issues on their political agenda when they were campaigning. The question is though around the special way of forming the self-government and actions of self-government in the territories that are temporarily occupied by Russia and terrorists backed by Russia. And we see that on the one hand there is quite a hot discussion in parliament, and which is more important, on the other hand, we see that Minsk agreements, of which these changes are an integrated part, they have to be fulfilled in full, because it is unfeasible, for instance, to have elections if the OSCE standards cannot be met, if we cannot assure security, if we cannot assure freedom of participation in the elections, freedom of vote, freedom of the media. So, and these in turn are impossible if there is still fighting, if Russian forces and their minions are there, and if the Ukrainian forces cannot ensure security there. That is why we still need time for the Russian Federation to start playing by the rules and actually fulfilling the whole bulk of Minsk agreements, starting from ceasefire, which is unfortunately not here, up to withdrawing forces and letting in the peace process.
But some political forces say that special status of these regions means that we are step off from our constitution, from our sovereignty, and do what the West or Russian Federation want we to do. So what is your point of view concerning this position?
Well, first of all, there is no special status. It is provided in the constitution and is provided in the law, which, by the way, was adopted by the previous hearing of the Rada, is a special way of self-government, which in detail means that local councils would have a say whom to appoint on those territories. Those councils, again, would have the right to have special economic arrangements with the center. So that is all about. It's not about some special status or federalization or any other things. And the most important, and it is actually set in the law, which I mentioned, is that this law can be operational only if there are elections on those territories, elections made by Ukrainian legislation and by the standards of the OSCE that I mentioned.
But why our President Petro Poroshenko wants to change constitution through the parliament, but not through the referendum? Because we had presidential election, we had local elections without occupied territories. Why concerning this situation, you don't want to do this?
Because the Constitution has very direct provisions how to change itself. And there is nothing about the referendum concerning those parts of the Constitution that are actually involved. It is a clear parliamentary procedure, and there is a decision of the Constitutional Court back in 2000 that says that the constitutional procedure should be fulfilled in order for the Constitution to be changed.
This week, Ukrainian parliament also voted for constitution changes in the part of justice, and we have a short video. Let's watch it, and then you will comment.
For those who vote for this law, you are ripping Ukrainian constitution. You want to eliminate our native country. We need to make changes in law by 226 voices and make correct changes in 300 in order to correct the procedure of changes for constitution, and then to organize referendum to confirm it by people. Nothing except positive will be happen as a result of this law. Any questions? It is not a discussion at all. Discussion concerning these laws will be further. Don't shame the decentralization. Don't destroy it, friends. I represent and warrant.
Well, how can you comment it? Why, if these changes are so positive, some political forces are against them?
There is always political discussion, and different political forces try to address different groups in society. But if we look in the nutshell of the reforms concerning judicial power, which was actually voted in the Rada and sent to the Constitutional Court for review, main thing is that the judges are getting rid of the excessive the immunity that they have, because there is so much criticism about the judges who are mostly corrupt, who cannot follow the legal procedures, and there is a necessity of clear mechanism to remove them from office if necessary. Second is actually the procedure of special scrutiny for every judge, to check if this judge is corrupt or not, and then to be sure that the judgment, justice is being fulfilled in Ukraine. And third main thing is for the Prosecutor General Office to deprive it from unnatural functions and leave with it only the functions that are prescribed, for instance, in the European legislation concerning presentation in court and things like that. So, as the speaker was saying, there is nothing but positive things in this constitution, and that is why basically the parliament did vote to support it.
But anyway, whether it is some negative sides of these positive changes, or
well, again,
because it's not reality when only some positive changes happens when such changes are made.
I should say that there, of course, is always a discussion and nothing is perfect, yet it is to judge of positive and negative, you have to look at substance. And actually, substance means that you have effective and practical leverage to access judges and make them be not corrupt and follow the legislation.
And my final question is connected with the coalition question. Well, these changes brought some disunity to coalition, and what the authority is going to do with this, or what is your view of the future of this coalition?
There was a meeting of President of Ukraine with heads of parliamentary factions, and they did arrive at very important agreements and conclusions. By February 16th, there will be a report of the government to the parliament, as it is prescribed by the law, and then the parliament, the coalition, again as it is said in the constitution, can judge upon every minister, and then there will be a coalitional decision of what will be the composition of the government. And to this, as we heard, there are some points, maybe in the coalition agreement there should be some changes. First and foremost, to set forth very precise terms and very precise parties, institutions who would be responsible for getting this coalition agreement into practice.
Well, thank you for a comprehensive explanation. It was nice to meet you here in our studio.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And our guest was Rostislav Pavlenko, Deputy Head of Presidential Administration of Ukraine. Ukrainians are urged to support the petition for protection of the equal rights of all persons with disabilities. More than 34,000 Ukrainians placed to orphanages, internats through a physical diagnosis. The petition to the presidency of Ukraine gained 400 votes.
I want to live.
Do it.
I want to feel.
Do it.
I want to breathe.
Do it.
I want to act.
Do it.
Young people with intellectual disabilities do not play. They talk about their lives. They want to say no civil death of disabled Ukrainian people. They also support petition to the President of Ukraine. On initiation of the President of Ukraine National Program, the institutionalization care of 254,000 persons with disabilities due to mental and intellectual disorders. Volodya, 27-year-old man, also signed the petition to the President. I signed the petition to the President. It's very important. It's struggle for values. More than 34,000 Ukrainians placed in orphanages, internats, through a psychiatric diagnosis. If the family cannot take care and a person needs assistance, at boring spent money Ukrainian taxpayers, Lyudmila Minina convinced psychiatric diagnosis should not prevent living in society. I have observed that the one-man issue that permeates the whole society and the influence the way of the persons with disabilities are perceived therein in the strong prevalence of the medical model of disability. This approach focuses on defining a person's defect and separating those that are healthy or normal from those that are unfit, resulting in the exclusion and segregation, objectifying attitudes and forced interventions. Raisa Kravchenko says proclaiming the European choice of Ukraine be consistent to introduce a system of support for people with intellectual and mental disabilities in the community. The first event put in the funding mechanism domiciliary care instead of boarding if the cost of care in the community do not exceed cost for residential care. Also support his family, workplace support, rehabilitation, support decision-making, support accommodation, social services, reasonable accommodation in all areas of life. This Ukraine's obligation under Article 19 ratified the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Persons with disabilities have the opportunity to choose their place of residence and where and with whom they live on an equal basis with others and not obliged to live in a particular living arrangement.
The main goal of our petition to the President of Ukraine is to inspire him to initiate the program of deinstitutionalization of persons with intellectual disabilities. Currently in Ukraine, to be placed in the institution is the only opportunity for the person to survive if he or she has no other means to survive, because the person with intellectual disability cannot survive herself or himself. So we want the finances which are used by the country, by the state, for this particular person to be used to help him or her remain in the community, not to be placed in the institution.
The Commissioner of the President of Ukraine of Children's Rights, Mykola Kuleba, emphasized that Ukraine is going through difficult times and the state must increase attention to the problems of people with disabilities. The President clearly has set the task by signing strategy of human rights for 5 years. During this period, residential institutions should be reformed by liquidation. We are talking not just about changing the names of internets, we are clearly talking about the elimination of orphanages. The Commissioner of the President of Ukraine on Children's Rights, Mykola Kuleba, reported to the President on the results of his work. He managed to reach compromise with the government and keep privileges for the disabled in public transport, taxation of pensions and payments.
Ukraine is covered by a flu epidemic. Hospitals are crowded and situation on the occupied territories run under control at all. How Ukraine tries to overcome the epidemic, watch in our video.
Right off, 3 different strains of flu attacked Ukraine this year, in particular California H1N1 virus. As of January 29, 155 people died from the flu, most of them in Odessa region. Such official data were announced by the Minister of Health. The most difficult situation is considered to be in the capital city and 11 regions. Meanwhile, about 300 people died from the flu and colds in the temporarily occupied territories of Donbass, said the press service of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine. They say there is a lack of medicines in the region.
The intensity of disease may be heavier next week, and then we will inevitably decline.
People are massively buying immune and antiviral drugs, as well as masks and vitamins. Although, as the Health Minister of Ukraine, Alexander Kvitashvili, claims it will not save from the flu. The virus is so small that can easily pass through the mask and can affect even through ice jelly coat.
If a male feels bad, and not during the flu season, but in general from any kind of virus, then it is proper to wear a mask. But the mask will not give a protection, maybe only psychologically.
Kvitashvili adds that the majority of patients falls on the hospital beds through their self-treatment. Therefore, at the first symptoms, it is advised to seek the qualified assistance during the first day of disease. Meanwhile, the sickness rate among school children has dropped by almost 30% after the introduction of quarantine in educational institutions, the Minister of Health informed.
The state has stopped studying process in more than 9,500 of educational institutions, but in areas where these activities were carried out from the beginning of the illness, in 1,000 schools learning process was resumed.
According to preliminary estimates, quarantine in schools and kindergartens will continue at least until the middle of the next week.
Ukraine will start producing of drones. The first 3 sets recently were passed to the armed forces by National Security Council Secretary Alexander Turchinov. According to him, homemade drones are 3 times cheaper than imported, and even better.
Less than a year, the first Ukrainian drone, Spectator, was launched into mass production. Ukroboronprom, which together with Kyiv Polytechnic University have worked on drones creation, are proud with the result of their work.
In February, less than a year ago, the idea only appeared, and now, in general, we already see all these patterns that are transferred to the Ministry of Defense. It is well-coordinated work of the whole country, all these present people.
According to the National Security Council Secretary Alexander Turchinov, such unmanned aerial complexes consisting of drones and monitoring and control systems can significantly improve the defense capacity of Ukraine. They are also cheaper than important counterparts by 3 times.
In our armed forces there is a demand precisely on combat unmanned aerial vehicles, and it is not a secret that we held meeting with Ukroboronprom and started production at Antonov stated price. And you know the potential of this company.
Domestic drones are inconspicuous and have a low noise level. They can reach speeds up to 120 km per hour. Additionally, the vehicle can be equipped with camera of day and night observation, a radiation sensor or other equipment. According to the project manager, to destroy the drone is difficult, as well as economically inefficient.
They are difficult to catch because they consist almost entirely of composite materials. Moreover, they are difficult to track and to reflect simply because of their small size and high speed. In addition, the creation of destruction tools is possible, but the question lies purely in economy. Such munitions are from 5 to 7 times more expensive than the drones, so it does not make sense to shoot them down.
The developers say that the vehicle starts off manually and is able to work under technical countermeasures. After testing, the domestic drones will be delivered in possession of armed forces of Ukraine.
It was Weekly Newscast by First Ukraine. Victoria Zabiyan was working for you in the studio. See you in 1 week. Goodbye.